Part 1. Title: I'm investigating the house of a cannibal serial killer. Here's what I found so far. Hi Reddit. I'm Chris, a 22-year-old journalism student at State U. I've been a fan of true crime since I was a kid, but this semester I decided to take it a step further. For my final project, I'm diving into a story that's as gruesome as it is mysterious. I've been investigating the infamous Glover Street house, the home of Jacob, the Butcher, Glover, one of the most notorious killers in state history. For those of you who don't know the case, here's a quick rundown. Jacob Glover was a handyman in the small town of Pine Hollow back in the late 80s and early 90s. On the surface, he was your typical blue-collar guy. He fixed roofs, painted fences, and even volunteered at the local food bank. But beneath that ordinary exterior was something far darker. Over a decade, Glover abducted at least 15 victims, most of whom were young women from surrounding towns. The police found evidence of torture, murder, and, brace yourselves, cannibalism. Yeah, you read that right, Glover wasn't just killing people, he was eating them. When he was finally arrested in 1993, authorities discovered a horror show in his basement, chains bolted to the walls, makeshift cages, and even a butcher's table. Worse yet, they found remains buried in the backyard. Some were identified, but many weren't. To this day, the full extent of Glover's crimes is unknown. Here's where it gets weirder. During his trial, Glover claimed he wasn't acting alone. He insisted he was part of an ancient order, called the Brotherhood of the Black Maw. Supposedly, this cult demanded sacrifices to appease some kind of entity. Most people chalked it up to insanity, but symbols linked to the Brotherhood were found throughout his home. The house itself is abandoned now. Locals avoid it like the plague, claiming it's haunted. Some even say Glover's spirit still lingers there, protecting its secrets. Naturally, when I heard about all this, I knew I had to check it out for myself. Last weekend, I made my first visit to the Glover Street house. I didn't tell anyone what I was doing because, let's face it, sneaking into a crime scene at night isn't exactly legal. Plus, I didn't want to attract any attention from the locals, they're not exactly thrilled when outsiders poke around their town's dark history. The house was everything I expected and more. It's a two-story Victorian, decayed to the point of looking like it might collapse at any second. The windows are shattered, the paint's peeling, and the yard is overgrown with weeds taller than I am. It's straight out of a horror movie. The first thing I noticed when I stepped inside was the smell. Even after all these years, the place still reeks, like mildew, rot, and something metallic I couldn't place. The floorboards creaked with every step, and the air was so thick with dust that I could barely breathe. I started in the living room, which was mostly empty except for a few broken pieces of furniture. I could see where the police had ripped up the floorboards during their search for bodies. Large, uneven patches of newer wood were nailed into place. From there, I moved to the kitchen. This is where things got interesting. On the wall above the sink, I found what looked like symbols carved into the plaster. They were faded but still legible, circles, triangles, and what looked like a crude drawing of an open mouth. It gave me chills, especially since I'd read about Glover carving similar symbols into his victims. But the real heartstopper came when I found the basement door. It was padlocked shut, but someone had clearly tried to break in at some point. The wood was splintered, and the lock looked rusted and weak. I felt this overwhelming sense of dread just standing there. I don't know how to explain it, but it felt like the house didn't want me there. Like I was trespassing somewhere I didn't belong. My gut told me to turn back, but curiosity got the better of me. I'll admit it, I chickened out before going down into the basement. I planned to bring some tools next weekend to pry the door open, but I wasn't about to do it alone in the dark. For now, I just took some photos of the door and the symbols in the kitchen. When I left the house, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone, or something, was watching me. The entire walk back to my car, I kept looking over my shoulder, half expecting to see someone lurking in the shadows. Anyway, That's where I'm at so far. I'll be heading back this weekend to dig deeper. I'll update you all as I uncover more. If anyone knows anything about cults or ancient symbols, drop a comment. I could use all the help I can get. Let me know if you want to see the photos I took. Wish me luck. Part 2. Title: I opened the basement door in the Glover Street house. I wish I hadn't. Hey Reddit. It's Chris again. First off, thanks for all the comments and advice on my last post. Some of you suggested I leave this alone, and trust me, I get it. This place gives me the creeps too. But I can't shake the feeling that there's more to this story than anyone knows, and honestly, the journalist in me can't let it go. So, as promised, I went back to the Glover Street house this weekend. This time, I came prepared. I brought a crowbar for the basement door, a flashlight, and a camera. I also made sure to wear gloves. Last thing I need is to leave fingerprints behind. I got there around midnight, same as before. The house was just as eerie, but this time it felt heavier. The air inside was thick, almost suffocating, and the smell was worse than I remembered. It's hard to describe, like something damp and rotten, but sharper, almost metallic. I didn't waste any time. I headed straight for the basement door and started working on the lock. It didn't take much, 2 good pulls with the crowbar, and the padlock snapped. The door creaked open, revealing a set of wooden stairs descending into darkness. I shined my flashlight down and instantly regretted it. The first thing I saw was the chains. Rusted and dangling from the walls like some grotesque decoration. They were attached to iron loops bolted into the concrete, and some of them still had frayed ropes or handcuffs attached. The walls were covered in scratches, long, deep gouges, as if someone had clawed at them desperately. The basement was bigger than I expected. The flashlight only illuminated part of it, but from what I could see, the floor was dirt, not concrete. That struck me as odd. Why would the basement of a Victorian house have a dirt floor? I took a few hesitant steps down, the stairs groaning under my weight. Every instinct in my body was screaming at me to turn around, but I pushed forward. I needed to know what was down there. At the bottom of the stairs, I found what I can only describe as a butcher's setup. There was a large wooden table in the center, stained dark with what I could only assume was blood. Tools were scattered around, knives, saws, and something that looked like a meat hook. Most were rusted, but a few looked disturbingly well maintained, like they'd been used more recently than the 90s. On one wall, I found more of those symbols, circles, triangles, and that open mouth motif. They were carved deep into the concrete, like they were meant to last forever. And then I saw it. In the far corner of the basement, there was a hole in the ground. It was about 4 feet wide, partially covered by a rotting wooden plank. When I shined my flashlight into it, I couldn't see the bottom. The light just disappeared into blackness. That's when I heard it. A faint sound, almost like a whisper, coming from the hole. It was too quiet to make out, but it wasn't random noise, it had rhythm, like speech. I froze. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might explode. The whispering grew louder, though it still sounded distant, like it was coming from deep within the hole. I don't know how long I stood there, but eventually, I backed away and snapped a few pictures. I couldn't bring myself to get closer to the hole. Something about it felt wrong. As I turned to head back up the stairs, I noticed something else, a small, leather-bound book sitting on a shelf near the stairs. It was old and covered in dust, but the spine was intact, and it didn't look like it had been there for decades like the rest of the stuff in the house. I grabbed it and practically ran up the stairs. As soon as I was out of the basement, I slammed the door shut and jammed the crowbar through the handle to keep it closed. I didn't stop running until I was back in my car. When I got home, I finally looked at the book. It's a journal, but not Glover's. It belonged to someone named A. Devereux. The entries are written in a mix of English and some language I can't identify. The parts one can read talk about rituals, sacrifices, and feeding the maw. One entry caught my eye. The maw demands flesh, but it is the soul it truly craves. Only those who offer themselves willingly may pass through the black maw unscathed. There's more, but I haven't had time to translate it yet. I'll share what I find in another post. Before I go, I want to ask, has anyone ever heard of the Black Maw? Or the Brotherhood of the Black Maw? I've googled it, but I can't find much. I'll keep digging, but I'd love to hear your thoughts. Until next time. Part 3. Title: I read the Butcher's Journal. Now I'm hearing things. Hi Reddit. It's Chris again. First, thanks to everyone who commented on my last post. Some of the insights you shared about cults and symbols were incredibly helpful, and honestly, pretty terrifying. A few of you even said I should burn the journal and never go back to the house. I can't say I haven't thought about it. But I've come too far to stop now. Last weekend's visit left me rattled. I couldn't stop thinking about the basement, especially the hole. The whispers I heard were too clear, too deliberate, to be a trick of my imagination. And the journal, well, that's what I've been focused on all week. The book belonged to someone named Devereaux, though I still have no idea who that is. From what I can tell, Devereaux was a member of the Brotherhood of the Black Maw, maybe even a leader. The journal is a mix of ritual instructions, diary entries, and what I think are prayers. Most of it is written in a strange, looping script that doesn't match any language I've ever seen. Here's what I've managed to translate so far. 1. The maw is a gateway. According to Devereaux, the Black Maw isn't just a symbol or a concept, it's an actual place. A passage between this world and something else. Something ancient and hungry. 2. The Brotherhood believed in sacrifices. The journal mentions offerings of flesh and blood, but also of willing souls. One line stuck with me. The maw craves more than death. It feeds on the fear of those who linger at its edge. 3. Jacob Glover wasn't acting alone. There are entries dated during the time of Glover's killing spree, and they mention someone referred to only as the Butcher. Devereaux wrote about Glover performing rituals in the basement and claimed the Brotherhood chose him because of his appetite for flesh. As unsettling as the journal is, it's also incredibly vague. It doesn't explain what the maw actually is or what the Brotherhood was trying to achieve. But I can't shake the feeling that this thing, the maw, is still out there, waiting. I've been trying to keep my investigation quiet, but something strange happened earlier this week. On Monday night, I was working late, going through the journal again, when I started hearing noises in my apartment. At first, it was subtle, just creaks and pops, the kind you'd expect from an old building. But then it got worse. I heard footsteps in the hallway outside my door, slow and deliberate. My building is usually dead quiet at night, so I went to check, but when I looked through the peephole, no one was there. Then, just as I was about to turn away, I heard a faint sound, like a whisper. I couldn't make out the words, but it was the same cadence I'd heard in the basement. That was enough for me. I locked the door, turned off the lights, and tried to convince myself it was nothing. But I didn't sleep much that night. Things got even stranger yesterday. I was on campus, working in the library, when I found a book about cults in the archives. It wasn't directly about the Brotherhood, but it mentioned a group in the 1920s that performed sacrificial rites in the Pine Hollow area. The book said their rituals involved carving symbols into the flesh of their victims, which immediately made me think of Glover. I was so absorbed in reading that I didn't notice the man standing behind me until he spoke. "Are you finding what you're looking for?" I nearly jumped out of my chair. He was tall, dressed in a dark suit, and his voice had this strange, almost musical quality to it. At first, I thought he might be a professor, but there was something off about him. His face was too smooth, like it didn't belong to a real person. I stammered something about doing research for a project, and he just smiled. "Be careful," he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. Sometimes, when you look into the maw, it looks back. Before I could say anything, he walked away. I don't know who he was or how he knew what I was researching, but his words chilled me to the bone. This weekend, I'm going back to the house. I need to know what's in that hole, even if it scares the hell out of me. There's something bigger going on here, something that goes beyond Jacob Glover. Before I go, I want to ask, has anyone else experienced something like this? Hearing whispers. Seeing strange people. Maybe it's just my nerves, but I can't shake the feeling that I'm being watched. I'll update you after my next visit. Wish me luck. Part 4. Title: I found what's in the hole. It wasn't meant to be seen. Hey Reddit. It's Chris again. I don't even know where to start this time. I thought I was prepared for whatever I'd find in the Glover Street house, but nothing could have prepared me for what I saw last night. I'm shaking as I write this. I haven't slept, and every sound makes me jump. If I don't get this out now, I'm afraid I'll lose my nerve. As I mentioned in my last post, I went back to the house yesterday. I needed to see what was in that hole. I left around 11 p.m. and got there a little after midnight. The streets were dead quiet, as usual. The house was the same crumbling ruin it had been on my previous visits, but this time, the atmosphere was different. The air felt heavier, almost oppressive, and the faint metallic smell was stronger. It wasn't just in the house, it seemed to hang in the air around the property, like the house itself was bleeding. I headed straight for the basement, flashlight and crowbar in hand. The door was just as I'd left it, with the crowbar still wedged through the handle to keep it shut. As I pulled it out and opened the door, I swear I heard something move downstairs, a soft shuffling sound, like feet on dirt. I told myself it was just my imagination and forced myself down the stairs. The basement was colder than before. My breath fogged up in the beam of my flashlight, and the whispers I'd heard last time seemed to echo faintly in the distance. The hole in the far corner drew my attention immediately. It looked darker, if that's even possible, like the shadows around it were thicker, more solid. I approached it slowly, every step feeling like a battle against some unseen force. My flashlight beam barely penetrated the blackness. When I was about 5 feet away, the whispers stopped. It was so sudden, so absolute, that it made my ears ring. For a moment, I thought I'd gone deaf. Then I heard it, a deep, guttural growl, coming from the hole. I froze. My mind raced, trying to rationalize the sound. Maybe it was an animal, I thought, a raccoon, a dog, something that had gotten trapped down there. But deep down, I knew better. Still, I had to see. I crouched down and shined my flashlight into the hole. The beam caught something. At first, I thought it was just dirt, but as I leaned closer, I realized it was bone, thick, jagged fragments that looked like they'd been chewed on. And then I saw it. 2 glowing eyes stared back at me, far deeper in the hole than my flashlight should have been able to reach. They weren't human, too large, too far apart, and they glowed with a faint yellow light, like embers in a dying fire. For a second, neither of us moved. Then the growl came again, louder this time, and something shifted in the darkness. I heard the scrape of claws on stone, and the eyes moved closer. I scrambled backward, tripping over the edge of the butcher's table and landing hard on the dirt floor. My flashlight skittered out of my hand and rolled, its beam swinging wildly around the room. In the chaos, I heard it climbing. I can't describe the sound, it was like nails on a chalkboard mixed with the crackle of breaking bones. Whatever was in that hole was pulling itself out, and I wasn't about to stick around to see what it looked like. I grabbed my flashlight and ran for the stairs. As I reached the top, I heard a voice, low and guttural, like a growl shaped into words. Do not return. I slammed the basement door shut and jammed the crowbar back through the handle, my hands shaking so badly I could barely grip it. Then I ran. I didn't stop running until I was back in my car, and even then, I felt like something was watching me. The drive home was a blur. I kept checking the rearview mirror, half expecting to see those glowing eyes following me. When I finally got home, I realized I was still clutching something in my hand. It was one of the symbols I'd seen carved into the basement walls, drawn on a piece of what looked like old parchment. I don't remember grabbing it, and I have no idea how it ended up in my hand. I don't know what to do. I feel like I've crossed a line, like I've seen something I wasn't supposed to see. The whispers haven't stopped. I can hear them even now, faint but constant, like they're just on the edge of my hearing. And my dreams, last night, I dreamed of the hole. I saw it again, but this time, I was inside it. Those eyes were everywhere, surrounding me, watching me, and the whispers were louder, clearer. They were calling my name. I don't know if I can keep doing this. But I also don't think I have a choice. If anyone has any advice, or knows anything about what the hell I'm dealing with, please, let me know. Part 5. Title: I found the Brotherhood's mark, and I'm being followed. Hey Reddit. It's Chris again. I wish I could tell you things have gotten better since my last post, but they've only gotten worse. The whispers haven't stopped, and I'm starting to notice things that don't make sense. Things that make me feel like I'm not alone, even when I'm locked in my apartment. I'll get to that, but first, let me tell you what happened over the weekend. After what I saw in the basement, I swore I wouldn't go back to the Glover Street house. But the thing is, I can't let it go. There's something about that place, about the hole, that's pulling me back. It's like an itch in my brain I can't scratch. So on Saturday, I did something I probably shouldn't have. I started researching the Brotherhood of the Black Maw. There's not much information out there, but I found a few obscure references. One article mentioned a cult that operated in the Pine Hollow area in the 1920s. They believed in a being called the Maw, which they described as a gateway to the beyond. The article didn't say much about what the beyond was, but it talked about rituals involving sacrifices, human sacrifices. Another source mentioned a survivor from one of their rituals. This person, identified only as AD, claimed the cult wasn't just about worshipping some abstract idea. They believed the Maw was a living, breathing thing, a creature that required constant feeding. Here's where it gets freaky. In one of AD's testimonies, they described symbols used by the Brotherhood to mark their territory. One of these symbols, a circle with jagged lines radiating from it, matched the drawing I found in the basement. I also found a reference to another location tied to the Brotherhood, an old abandoned barn just outside Pine Hollow. It was supposedly used for initiation rites. I figured if I was going to find more answers, that would be the place. I drove out there on Sunday night. The barn was exactly as I expected, falling apart, overgrown with weeds, and reeking of mildew. But as soon as I stepped inside, I knew I'd made a mistake. The walls were covered in symbols, just like the ones in the Glover Street house. Some were carved into the wood, others painted in a dark, dried substance that looked suspiciously like blood. In the center of the barn was a makeshift altar, a slab of stone surrounded by burned-out candles. I felt the same oppressive weight I'd felt in the house, like the air was thicker here, harder to breathe. Then I noticed the footprints. They were in the dirt around the altar, large, human-like, but not quite right. The toes were too long, and the prints were deeper than they should have been, like whoever, or whatever, made them was unnaturally heavy. I snapped a few pictures and was about to leave when I heard it again. Whispers. They weren't coming from the altar or the walls this time. They were outside, circling the barn. I froze. My flashlight flickered, and for a second, I was plunged into darkness. When the light came back, I saw something that made my stomach drop, a handprint on the barn door. It wasn't there before, and it was huge, much larger than any human hand. That was enough for me. I bolted back to my car and sped off, but the entire drive home, I felt like I was being watched. Every time I looked in the rearview mirror, I expected to see those glowing eyes from the hole. And then, when I got back to my apartment, I noticed something even stranger. The symbol I'd found in the Glover Street basement, the circle with jagged lines, was drawn on my front door. It wasn't there when I left, and I have no idea who could have put it there. My neighbors claim they didn't see anything, but I'm starting to wonder if they're telling the truth. Since then, things have only gotten worse. The whispers are louder now, and they're not just in my head, I hear them in the walls, the floor, even my closet. I've caught glimpses of shadows moving where they shouldn't be. And twice now, I've seen someone standing across the street, watching my apartment. I don't know who they are, but they're tall and dressed in black. They don't move, they just stand there, staring. Last night, I woke up to find the journal open on my desk. I'm positive I closed it before going to bed, but there it was, flipped to a page I hadn't read yet. The passage talked about the mark of the maw, a symbol used to bind people to the brotherhood. It also mentioned something about an unbroken chain of sacrifices. I don't know what it means, but I'm terrified I might be part of that chain now. I need answers, and I need them fast. I'm going back to the Glover Street house this weekend, but this time, I'm not just going to observe. I'm going to destroy whatever is in that hole. If anyone has any ideas on how to deal with this, or knows what the hell the mark of the maw does, please let me know. I don't think I can do this alone. Part 6. Title: I tried to destroy the hole in the basement. It fought back. Hi Reddit. It's Chris again. I don't even know how to write this. Last night was, I don't even know what to call it. A disaster? A nightmare? All I know is that the Glover Street house isn't just cursed, it's alive. I went back to the house, just like I said I would. I couldn't sit in my apartment anymore, not with the whispers growing louder and the feeling of being watched constantly eating away at me. The symbol on my door hasn't faded, and I swear it's pulsing, like it's breathing. I packed everything I thought I'd need: salt, lighter fluid, a hammer, and some matches. I didn't know what would work, but my plan was simple: get into the basement, destroy the hole, and end this once and for all. I got to the house around midnight. The air outside was eerily still, like the world was holding its breath. The moment I stepped inside, the metallic smell hit me harder than ever. It was so thick I could taste it. The house was darker than usual. Even with my flashlight, the shadows seemed deeper, more solid. I headed straight for the basement door, every instinct in my body screaming at me to turn back. When I opened the door, I swear the darkness at the bottom of the stairs moved. It wasn't just the absence of light, it was shifting, alive. I forced myself down the steps, gripping the hammer so tightly my knuckles ached. The whispers started almost immediately, but this time, they were louder, clearer. They weren't just incoherent murmurs anymore, I could make out words. Chris. Stay. Join us. I tried to ignore them, focusing on the hole in the far corner. It looked even darker than before, like it was swallowing the light from my flashlight. I started by pouring the salt in a circle around the hole. As soon as the first grains hit the dirt, the whispers turned into screams. They weren't coming from the hole, they were coming from the walls, the ceiling, everywhere. I don't know how to describe the sound. It wasn't human. It was like 1,000 voices crying out at once, overlapping in a horrible, guttural cacophony. I kept going, pouring the salt as quickly as I could. The air around me felt like it was vibrating, and I could feel something watching me, something angry. Then the growling started. It came from the hole, deep and guttural, shaking the ground beneath my feet. I fumbled with the lighter fluid, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold it. I poured it over the hole and onto the surrounding dirt, praying it would be enough. Before I could strike a match, something shot out of the hole. It was black and oily, like tar, but it moved like a living thing, writhing, twisting, reaching for me. One of the tendrils wrapped around my ankle, and the cold was so intense it burned. I screamed and swung the hammer, smashing it against the tendril. It recoiled, but not before another one lashed out and grabbed my wrist. The cold spread up my arm, and I could feel it digging into my skin, like it was trying to burrow inside me. I don't know how, but I managed to break free. I stumbled backward, barely keeping my balance, and struck the match. The moment the flame touched the lighter fluid, the screams reached a deafening pitch. The fire roared to life, spreading across the hole and the dirt around it. For a moment, I thought it was over. But then the shadows started moving. They poured out of the walls and the floor, swirling around the fire like a storm. I could see shapes in them, faces, twisted and distorted, mouths open in silent screams. And then I heard it. Fool. The voice wasn't coming from the hole or the shadows. It was inside my head, deep and booming, shaking my very thoughts. You cannot destroy them all. You can only feed it. I ran. I don't remember getting up the stairs or out of the house, but the next thing I knew, I was in my car, speeding down the empty streets. My hands were covered in ash and blood, and my skin still burned where the tendrils had touched me. When I got home, I saw it. The symbol on my door had changed. The jagged lines were longer, sharper, and the circle in the center was now filled with what looked like a single staring eye. I don't know what to do. I thought I could stop this, but now I realize I've only made it worse. The whispers aren't just in my apartment anymore, they're everywhere. I hear them in my car, at the library, even in my dreams. I don't think I can escape this. If anyone knows what the hell is going on, or how I can stop it, please, help me. Part 7. Title: The Brotherhood is real, and they're watching me. Hi Reddit. It's Chris again. I've been trying to keep it together, but I don't know how much longer I can do this. The whispers haven't stopped, they're louder now, constant, like a buzzing in my brain. And the worst part? I'm not alone anymore. Let me back up. After my last visit to the Glover Street house, I thought I'd burned whatever was in that hole. But I was wrong. All I did was wake it up. The symbol on my door changed again last night. The eye in the center, it's not just a symbol anymore. It moves. I've caught it shifting when I glance at it out of the corner of my eye, and once, I swear I saw it blink. And then there's the figure outside. For the past few nights, someone has been standing across the street from my apartment. At first, it was just one person, tall, dressed in black, always facing my building. But now there are 3 of them. They don't move, they don't speak, and no matter how long I stare, I can't make out their faces. It's like the shadows are clinging to them, hiding their features. Last night, I tried calling the cops, but by the time they arrived, the figures were gone. The officers looked at me like I was crazy. Maybe you're just stressed, one of them said. Have you thought about taking a break from whatever you're working on? I wanted to scream at him. This morning, I decided to dig deeper into the Brotherhood of the Black Maw. If these figures are connected to the cult, and I'm sure they are, I need to know more about what I'm dealing with. I started by revisiting the library where I found that book about Pine Hollow's cult activity. I searched through every record I could find, old newspapers, public records, even handwritten letters archived in the local history section. And that's when I found it. An article from 1928 mentioned a fire that destroyed a church just outside Pine Hollow. According to the article, the church had been used by a group of occultists for secret meetings. The fire was ruled arson, but no arrests were ever made. One detail caught my eye, a photograph of the church taken before the fire. Etched into the stone above the main door was the same symbol I've been seeing, the circle with jagged lines and the eye in the center. The article also mentioned a name, Devereaux. That's when it hit me. The journal I found in the basement was written by A. Devereaux. Whoever they were, they must have been deeply involved in the Brotherhood. I need to find out more about Devereaux, but so far, I've hit a wall. The library didn't have anything else, and when I searched online, all I found were scattered references to old cult activity. But here's where things get really scary. When I got back to my apartment this afternoon, the figures were gone. For a moment, I felt relieved. But when I stepped inside, I realized something was wrong. The journal was on my desk, even though I'd left it in my backpack. The pages were open to a passage I hadn't read yet. The maw demands its vessel. It watches. It waits. And when the chain is complete, it consumes. I don't know what that means, but I feel like I'm part of this chain now. And then I saw the envelope. It was sitting next to the journal, plain and unmarked. Inside was a single piece of paper with one word written on it. Tonight. I don't know who left it, but I have a pretty good idea. The figures, the Brotherhood, they're escalating. I can feel it. I'm going back to the Glover Street house one last time. I need to end this, whatever it takes. I don't know if I'll make it back, but I can't keep running. If I don't post again, tell someone about this. Tell them what I found. Wish me luck. Part 8. Title: The Maw Has Opened. Hi Reddit. This will be my last post. I went back to the Glover Street house last night. I didn't have a choice. The whispers were unbearable, the shadows in my apartment moved constantly, and the figures outside my building were closer than ever. They weren't just across the street anymore, they were standing in the parking lot, directly under the light, still cloaked in shadows. And the symbol on my door. It started glowing. I watched it pulse like a heartbeat, faint yellow light spilling into my apartment. So I grabbed the journal, my flashlight, and whatever courage I had left, and I drove to the house. It was different this time. The house didn't look abandoned anymore. The windows were no longer shattered, and the yard wasn't overgrown. It was as if the place had been restored to its former self, except the air around it shimmered like heat rising off asphalt. I almost turned back, but the whispers were louder than ever, and they weren't just coming from inside the house, they were in my head, urging me forward. When I stepped inside, the door slammed shut behind me. The interior was pristine. The walls were clean, the furniture intact. A fire crackled in the fireplace, casting flickering shadows that danced across the room. And standing in the center of it all was a man. He was tall and thin, dressed in an old-fashioned black suit that looked like it belonged in the 1920s. His face was pale, almost waxy, and his eyes, they were yellow, glowing like the symbol on my door. "Welcome, Christopher," he said, his voice smooth and deep. "We've been waiting for you." I wanted to run, but my legs wouldn't move. "You've seen the maw," he continued. "You've heard its call. Now, it is time to complete the chain." I tried to speak, to ask him what he meant, but the words caught in my throat. He gestured toward the basement door, which swung open on its own. Beyond it, I could see nothing but darkness, thicker, deeper than any shadow I'd ever seen. "The maw awaits," he said. "Step forward and embrace your destiny." Somehow, I managed to shake my head. "I'm not part of this," I finally croaked. "I don't want anything to do with your cult." He smiled, and it was the most horrifying thing I'd ever seen. His teeth were jagged and yellow, like they didn't belong in a human mouth. "You were chosen the moment you opened the journal," he said. "The maw does not ask. It takes." At that moment, the whispers turned into a deafening roar. The walls rippled like water, and the fire in the fireplace exploded outward, engulfing the room in light. The man was gone, but the basement door remained open. And then I felt it, something pulling me, dragging me toward the darkness. I fought it with everything I had, but the pull was too strong. As I reached the top of the stairs, I saw them, the glowing eyes from the hole. They were everywhere, hundreds of them, staring up at me from the abyss. I don't remember much after that. Just flashes. Falling. Screaming. The sound of bones breaking and reforming. And then, silence. When I woke up, I wasn't in the house anymore. I was in the woods, surrounded by figures in black. Their faces were still hidden, but I could feel their eyes on me. The journal was gone, and so was the Glover Street house. It was like it had never existed. But the whispers are still with me, louder than ever. And when I close my eyes, I see the maw, a gaping, endless void, filled with glowing eyes and hungry shadows. I don't know how long I have left, but I can feel it growing inside me. The maw isn't just a place. It's a part of me now. So this is it, Reddit. My final update. If you've been following my posts, take this as a warning: stay away from the Glover Street house. Stay away from the Brotherhood of the Black Maw. And whatever you do, don't open the journal. Chris. Thank you for listening to my story to the end. New videos are released every day, so subscribe to the channel so you don't miss it. Also, leave a comment on this video. I care about your opinion.